Welcome back to another Afro-Korean love story. The scratching of the fountain pen echoed in the silent room, each stroke turning a human life into a mere transaction. In 30 seconds, the door would close behind her father, leaving her trapped with his greatest enemy. What would you do if the person supposed to protect you signed you away to settle a debt? She was the enemy's daughter, a virgin in a modest dress, standing rigid before a man who treated lives like paperwork. On one side, her father retreated in a beige trench coat, choosing survival over blood. On the other, Sung-Hwan, a ruthless warlord sitting bored behind a massive desk, his tattoos hinting at violence beneath his suit. The ink was drying. One signature. One new owner. This is how Naomi Reed became the obsession of the man hired to destroy her. The heavy door of the black sedan clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the city and sealing Naomi in with a monster. The interior smelled of expensive leather and that faint, sharp scent of sandalwood that seemed to cling to Sung-Hwan. He didn't look at her. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his suit, the dark fabric stretching over the tattoos on his wrists, and tapped the partition. The car glided forward, smoother than any vehicle she had ever ridden in, moving with the weight of undeniable authority. Naomi pressed herself against the door, her fingers digging into the modest fabric of her skirt. The city lights blurred past, streaks of neon that felt like a life she was rapidly leaving behind. The silence was suffocating. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of a predator who had already eaten. "Where are we going?" Her voice cracked, small and pathetic in the cavernous space. Lee didn't turn. He pulled a sleek tablet from the seat pocket, his attention entirely on the glowing screen. "To your new home. Though, storage might be a more accurate term until I decide your utility." His indifference was worse than anger. "My father," she stammered, the words tasting like ash. "He'll fix this. He just needed time. He wouldn't just leave me." For the first time since the office, Lee looked at her. His eyes were dark voids, devoid of sympathy, reflecting the passing streetlights. He let out a dry, humorless huff, not quite a laugh. "Your father didn't need time, Naomi. He needed an exit strategy." Lee's voice was low, a smooth baritone that vibrated through the quiet cabin. Marcus owed the syndicate $4 million. He had two choices, a bullet in the brain, or a cleared ledger and a one-way ticket to Macau. Naomi stopped breathing. The air conditioning suddenly felt freezing. "No. He loves me. He loves survival," Lee corrected, turning back to his tablet as if the conversation bored him. "He negotiated the terms himself. He didn't even haggle over the price. You were the currency for his freedom. The debt is cleared. You are the receipt." The car turned onto a private road, the city fading into the distance. Naomi looked at her hands, expecting them to look different, branded, sold. The realization hit her not with a scream, but with a cold, heavy paralysis. She hadn't been stolen in the night. She had been bartered across a desk by the man who taught her to ride a bike. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating, but she refused to let them fall. In the reflection of the window, she saw Lee watching her, his expression unreadable, already calculating the value of his new acquisition. The iron gates parted with a low, mechanical hum, revealing a sprawling estate that looked less like a home and more like a fortress carved from obsidian and glass. Floodlights cut through the darkness, illuminating manicured lawns that were too perfect, too still. As the car rolled to a stop, beneath the portico, Naomi felt the air pressure shift, heavier, colder. Lee exited first, not waiting for her. He walked up the stone steps with the casual arrogance of a king returning to his castle. A driver opened Naomi's door, and she stumbled out, her legs trembling. Inside, the foyer was a cavern of marble and silence. A line of staff stood rigid, maids in crisp uniforms and men in dark suits. As Lee passed them, they bowed in unison, a synchronized wave of submission. "Welcome home, master," they chorused. Then, their eyes shifted to her. "Welcome home, mistress." The title hit her like a physical blow. Mistress. It implied power, authority, a place at the head of the table. But she knew what it really meant. It was a gilded label for a possession. She wasn't a guest, she was inventory. Lee didn't stop. He gestured vaguely to an older woman with a severe bun and kind, pitying eyes. "Get her out of those rags. Burn them. I want her presentable for dinner." With that, he disappeared down a long hallway, the heavy doors of his study swallowing him whole. The older woman, the head housekeeper, guided Naomi up a floating staircase to a suite that was larger than her father's entire apartment. "Please, mistress. The bath is drawn." Naomi stood in the center of the room, clutching her elbows. "Please don't call me that. It is the master's order," the woman said softly, her tone brooking no argument. "Now, the dress." Naomi's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her worn, gray cotton dress, the dress she had worn to the office, the dress she had worn when she still had a father. As it pulled at her feet, she felt the last shred of her old life dissolve. The housekeeper vanished the garment instantly, replacing it with a robe of emerald silk. The fabric was impossibly light, sliding over her skin like cool water. It was exquisite, expensive, and terrifying. When she looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. The modest daughter was gone. In her place stood a doll wrapped in expensive packaging, prepared for display. The silk clung to her curves, exposing more than it hid. It didn't feel like clothing, it felt like a costume for a role she had never auditioned for. "Dinner is in 20 minutes, the housekeeper said, bowing deeply before backing out of the room. "The master does not like to wait." Left alone in the silence of the golden cage, Naomi touched the cold glass of the window. There were no bars, but looking down at the patrolled grounds, she knew she had never been more trapped. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the mahogany dining table, but it did nothing to warm the room. The air was chilled, regulated to a precise temperature that felt more like a server room than a home. Sung-Hwan sat at the head of the table, an espresso and a tablet in front of him. He was already dressed in a charcoal suit, immaculate and armored against the day. Naomi hesitated at the threshold. She was still wearing the silk robe, feeling naked despite the heavy fabric. A servant pulled out the chair to Lee's right, close enough to touch, yet separated by a chasm of power. "Sit," Lee said without looking up. It wasn't a yell, it was a statement of fact, like gravity. Naomi obeyed, her legs stiff. She stared at the plate of fruit and pastries before her, her stomach churning with nausea. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "What happens now?" she whispered, the question hanging heavy in the silence. Am I supposed to go to your room?" Lee stopped scrolling. He set the tablet down with a deliberate click and turned his chair to face her. His eyes swept over her, clinical and detached, assessing her trembling frame. "You think I bought you for sex," he stated flatly. Naomi flinched. "Men like you, they take what they want. Men like me invest," he corrected, his voice cool. "And I don't damage my investments for fleeting pleasure. Rape is a desperate act for men who lack control. I have never lacked control." He picked up his coffee, taking a slow sip while she processed the words. He wasn't comforting her, he was insulting her father's assumption and her own fears. "However," he continued, the cup clinking softly against the saucer, "you are my property. And ownership comes with terms." He held up a finger. "First, transparency. You will have no secrets. No hidden phones, no whispered calls, no locked doors. Every aspect of your life is now open to my audit." He raised a second finger. "Second, obedience. When I speak, you listen. When I summon, you appear. I do not repeat myself, Naomi. In my world, hesitation is a liability. And third," he leaned forward, invading her personal space for the first time, the scent of sandalwood overwhelming her senses. "You will not run. The world outside these gates is filled with wolves who would tear you apart just to send a message to me. Here, you are a prisoner, yes. But you are a breathing one. Out there, you are collateral damage." He sat back, his mask of indifference sliding back into place. "Eat your breakfast. You're too thin, and I dislike fragility in my house." Naomi looked down at the pristine fruit, her heart hammering against her ribs. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't threatened violence. But as she picked up a fork, she realized his demand for her total submission was far more terrifying than any physical threat. He didn't just want her body, he intended to own her mind. The hallway was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of silence that magnified the sound of Naomi's bare feet against the cold marble. It was past 2 in the morning, but sleep was impossible in a bed that felt too large in a room that felt too much like a display case. Seeking a distraction, she wandered toward the library, drawn by the faint sliver of amber light spilling from beneath the heavy oak doors. She pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, expecting to find a book. Instead, she found the master of the house stripped of his armor. Lee stood by the fireplace, the dying embers casting long, dancing shadows against the dark wood paneling. His suit jacket lay discarded on a leather chair, and his crisp white dress shirt was unbuttoned, hanging open at his waist. He was pressing a damp cloth to his ribs, wincing slightly as he wiped away a smear of fresh blood. Naomi froze, her hand still on the brass doorknob. It wasn't the blood that stole the air from her lungs. It was the canvas of his skin. Dense, intricate tattoos swirled across his chest and shoulders, dark ink slithering up his neck like smoke to lick at his jawline. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized the art was functional. The ink was thickest over jagged lines of raised flesh, old knife wounds, puckered bullet scars, and burns that told a history of violence she couldn't comprehend. The polished CEO who signed contracts with a fountain pen was a lie. Beneath the Italian silk lived a brawler who had bled for every inch of his empire. "Close the door, Naomi," he said, his voice rougher than usual, stripped of its boardroom polish. "Unless you intend to stand there gaping all night." He didn't cover himself. He tossed the bloodied cloth onto the side table and turned to face her fully. He waited for her to recoil, to look at him with the same revulsion she had shown in the office. But she didn't. She stepped into the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. Her eyes traced the vicious scar that bisected a dragon on his collarbone before meeting his gaze. "I thought you just gave orders," she whispered. "I didn't know you fought your own wars. How do you think I enforce the orders?" Lee asked, watching her carefully. "The suit is for the public. The ink covers the cost." He took a step toward her, the firelight catching the feral intensity in his eyes. For days, he had looked at her with bored detachment, as if she were a piece of furniture he was waiting to resell. Now, as she stood unflinching before his scars, that boredom evaporated. His gaze sharpened, dark and assessing, studying her not as an asset but as a riddle he hadn't yet solved. "Does it hurt?" she asked, gesturing vaguely to his bruised side. "Everything hurts, Naomi," he replied softly, the distance between them suddenly charged with a dangerous electricity. "That is the price of remaining at the top." The crystal chandeliers of the Emerald Lounge shimmered overhead, but to Naomi, they looked like suspended daggers. She sat stiffly next to Lee, a massive diamond weighing down her left hand, a prop for the evening's performance. The restaurant was filled with Seoul's elite, predators in tuxedos who smiled with too many teeth. Lee's hand rested on the small of her back, a possessive weight that warned everyone, "Look, but do not touch." Asterisk. "Relax," Lee murmured against her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "You look like you're waiting for an execution." "I am," she whispered back. "Social execution." Before he could reply, a shadow fell over their table. Lee Sung-Hwan, a voice dripped with mock civility. "I didn't think they let street dogs into establishments like this, even if they do learn to walk on two legs." Naomi looked up to see a man in a flashy white suit, his face flushed with wine. It was Park Min-ho, the son of a rival construction magnate, a man born into wealth, possessing none of the scars Lee hid beneath his shirt. Lee didn't flinch. He didn't even stand. He simply swirled his wine, the red liquid coating the glass. The silence he projected was violent, a coiled spring waiting to snap. But Park, emboldened by alcohol in the public setting, turned his sneer toward Naomi. "And this must be the Reed girl," Park laughed, looking her up and down with grotesque familiarity. "I heard your father finally paid his dues. I didn't realize he paid in flesh. Tell me, darling, does he possess any manners, or is he as savage in the bedroom as he is in the boardroom?" The table went deadly quiet. Lee's grip on his wine glass tightened, the stem threatening to snap. He was ready to end Park, consequences be damned. But Naomi spoke first. She set her napkin down with deliberate, terrifying grace, smoothing the silk of her dress. She turned her gaze on Park, her expression the picture of polite, high society boredom. "Mr. Park," she said, her voice clear and sweet, carrying easily to the neighboring tables. "It is fascinating to see you here. My father always told me that men of true power never need to raise their voices or belittle others to command a room. They simply exist." She tilted her head, her eyes innocent but her words razor-sharp. "Mr. Lee built an empire from nothing. You, on the other hand, seem to be struggling to maintain the one your father handed you. Perhaps you should worry less about my bedroom and more about why your stock price dropped 12 points this morning. Desperation is such an unflattering cologne. Park's mouth opened, but no sound came out. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the nearby tables. He had been dismissed, not by a gangster, but by a well-bred woman who had just publicly castrated him with a smile. Red-faced, he spun on his heel and retreated. Naomi picked up her water glass, her hand trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. She refused to look at Lee, terrified she had overstepped. "Drink your wine, Naomi," Lee said softly. She glanced at him. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at her. The cold indifference was gone, replaced by something hotter, darker. The corner of his mouth quirked upward, a smirk of genuine amusement and dangerous approval. "I thought I bought a dove," he murmured, clinking his glass against hers. "Turns out, I bought a hawk." The storm battered the glass walls of the penthouse, turning the panoramic view of Seoul into a chaotic blur of rain and lightning. But inside the nightmare, it was dead silent. Naomi was back in the mahogany office, her feet glued to the floor. The only sound was the scratching of the pen. Scratch, scratch, sold. She reached out for her father's coat, but he dissolved into smoke. The door clicked shut, locking her in darkness. Naomi woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright as thunder shook the room. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, and her skin was cold, slick with sweat. She wasn't in the office. She was in the silk sheets of the golden cage. The door to her bedroom flew open. Lee stood there, silhouetted by the lightning flash, looking less like a man and more like a wraith woven from the shadows. He didn't have a weapon, but his posture was coiled, ready for violence. He scanned the room instantly, checking for intruders, for threats, for anything that didn't belong. Finding nothing but a terrified girl, his shoulders lowered slightly, though the tension didn't leave his frame. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Naomi." His voice was a command, cutting through the panic. She flinched as he sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. She pulled her knees to her chest, trembling. "He left me," she whispered, the dream bleeding into reality. "He just walked away." Lee didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her it was just a dream. He reached out, his large hand wrapping around her nape, his thumb pressing firmly against the pulse jumping in her throat. His touch was heavy, grounding, anchoring her to the present. "Look at me," he ordered. She forced her eyes to meet his. In the dim light, the scars on his neck seemed to pulse. He looked dangerous, terrifying, and utterly immovable. "Your father is gone," Lee said, his voice low and vibrating with dark certainty. "He traded you. That transaction is closed." Naomi sobbed, a dry, broken sound. "I'm all alone." "No," Lee corrected, his grip on her neck tightening just enough to demand absolute focus. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, stealing the air from her lungs. "You are not alone. You were owned." It should have terrified her. It should have made her scream. But in the chaos of the storm, with the world trying to tear her apart, his words didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a shield. "You belong to the syndicate now. You belong to me," he murmured, his thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek, not gently, but possessively. "And I protect my assets. Ghosts cannot hurt you here. Memories cannot touch you. Nothing touches what is mine, Naomi. Not even your past." For the first time since the office, the shaking stopped. The fear of being discarded vanished, replaced by the terrifying, intoxicating safety of being kept. She leaned into his hand, surrendering to the monster who promised to keep the other monsters away. The peace of the afternoon shattered with the glass. One moment, Naomi was sitting in the solarium, watching the rain. The next, a deafening boom rocked the foundation of the estate. The floor-to-ceiling windows imploded, showering the room in a lethal rain of shards. The alarms screamed, a high, piercing wail that vibrated in her teeth. Naomi threw herself behind a heavy stone planter, covering her head as dust and drywall choked the air. Gunfire erupted in the hallway, the dry pop-pop-pop of automatic weapons echoing off the marble floors. It wasn't a drill. The fortress had been breached. She curled into a ball, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the end. She expected to be dragged out, used as leverage, or killed on the spot. Then, the rhythm of the gunfire changed. The chaotic spray of the intruders was answered by the thundering boom of a heavier weapon. A man screamed, the sound cut short by a wet gurgle. "Naomi!" The voice wasn't human. It was a roar, primal and terrifying. Naomi peeked over the stone rim. Lee Sung-Hwan strode through the haze of smoke and debris. The board executive from the office was gone. The man who stood in the wreckage was a demon. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt splattered with crimson that wasn't his own. In his hand, a heavy pistol smoked. He didn't look for cover. He moved with the terrifying confidence of a predator who knew he was the most dangerous thing in the room. He shot a shadow moving in the doorway without even breaking stride, executing the threat with mechanical precision. Then his wild, frantic eyes swept the room. "Naomi!" He bellowed again, spinning in a circle, his chest heaving. "I'm here," she cried out, her voice barely a whisper. He was there in an instant. He didn't offer a gentle hand, he hauled her up by her waist, his grip bruising, dragging her behind a reinforced pillar. His hands were all over her, checking her arms, her face, her torso, searching for blood. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown, stripping away the calm mask to reveal sheer, unadulterated panic. Not for himself, but for her. "Did they touch you?" He snarled, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "If they touched you, I will flay them alive." "I'm okay," she sobbed, clinging to his blood-spattered shirt. "I'm okay." He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly it hurt. He shielded her body with his own, turning his back to the open door, making himself the human shield. "Stay down," he commanded, reloading his weapon with a sharp clack. "I am going to kill every single one of them." Naomi buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of gunpowder and sweat. Her father had walked away in a quiet office to save his own skin. Lee Sung-Hwan was standing in a war zone, ready to burn the world down to keep a scratch off her skin. Shivering in the arms of a murderer, Naomi realized with a jolt that she was finally safe. The heavy oak door creaked open, echoing the sound that had haunted Naomi's nightmares for 3 months. The setting was identical to the day she was sold. The dim lighting, the scent of cigar smoke, the imposing desk that served as Lee Sung-Hwan's throne. But the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Marcus Reed stood before the desk, his trench coat damp from the rain, his face flushed with a desperate, greedy heat. He didn't look like a father coming to rescue his child. He looked like a gambler chasing a loss. "The contract is void, Lee," Marcus spat, slamming a crumpled piece of paper onto the pristine leather surface of the desk. "I found a loophole. Section 4, Paragraph C. Guardianship creates a conflict of interest." Lee didn't even blink. He sat reclined in his chair, one hand resting casually on the armrest, the other toying with the gold fountain pen, the same pen that had signed Naomi's life away. "You didn't find a loophole, Marcus. You found a calculator. You spent the 4 million, didn't you?" Marcus wiped sweat from his upper lip. "That's irrelevant. The Ivanov brothers, they made an offer. A better offer. 6 million. They want the girl. They're willing to pay for the pristine condition she's in." From the shadows in the corner of the room, the air grew freezing cold. "You aren't here to take her home," Lee said, his voice dangerously soft. "You are here to flip the asset. She's my daughter," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "I have parental rights. I demand you bring her out. I tell her we're leaving, and she'll come running. She knows her duty. Does she?" Lee's eyes shifted, looking past Marcus to the figure standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. "Naomi," Lee said, "your father believes you are ready to be resold." Marcus spun around, his eyes widening. Naomi stepped out of the shadows. She wasn't wearing the gray, shapeless dress of a victim anymore. She wore a tailored black suit that mirrored Lee's, her hair sharp and sleek, her posture rigid not with fear, but with discipline. She didn't look at the floor. She looked directly at her father. "Naomi," Marcus breathed, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "Baby, get your things. We're leaving. The Ivanovs, they have a big estate in Moscow. You'll like it there." He reached for her. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She simply watched his hand approach, her expression carved from ice. "The Ivanovs run a trafficking ring, father," she said, her voice steady and unrecognizable to the man who raised her. "They don't have estates. They have kennels." Marcus froze, his hand hovering in the air. "Don't speak to me like that. I am saving you. You sold me for 4 million, Naomi stated, stepping closer, towering over him in her heels. "And now you want to sell me for 6. You aren't a savior, old man. You're just a merchant who regrets selling low." She turned her back on him, walking toward the desk, not to stand in front of it but to stand beside Lee's chair. She rested her hand on the leather backrest, a clear, visual declaration of where her loyalty now lay. "I am not inventory anymore," she said, looking down at her father. "And I am not leaving." The silence in the room was heavy, but this time, it didn't press down on Naomi's shoulders. It crushed Marcus. Lee Sung-Hwan didn't rise from his chair. He simply looked at Naomi, his expression unreadable to anyone else, but to her, it was loud and clear. He was offering her the weapon. Not a gun, but the decision. "You heard the lady," Lee said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "But I am a man of contracts. The original deal stands unless the new owner wishes to void it. So, Naomi, what is your verdict?" Naomi looked at her father. She searched for the fear she used to feel, the desperate need for his approval. She found nothing. She saw only a hollow, sweating man in a cheap coat who viewed her as a line item on a ledger. "You think you're a victim, don't you?" Naomi asked softly. "You think you're being robbed?" "I gave you life," Marcus stammered, his eyes darting nervously to the guard stationed by the door. "No," she corrected. "You gave me a price tag." She walked around the desk, her heels clicking against the hardwood, a sound of authority, not flight. "I used to hate you for what you did in this room. I hated you for signing that paper. But looking at you now, I realize I should thank you." Marcus blinked, confused. "Thank me? You didn't sell me into slavery, father," she said, her voice turning steel hard. "You sold me to a king. You didn't cage me. You set me free from a coward." She turned to the guards, her face devoid of emotion. "Remove him. If he returns, do not bother opening the gate. Just bury him." Marcus opened his mouth to scream, but the guards were on him instantly, dragging him backward. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his pleas. The scratch of his existence was erased from the room. Naomi didn't watch him go. She turned to Lee, who was watching her with a dark, smoldering pride. The barrier between them, the desk, was no longer a divide. She hopped up onto the heavy mahogany surface, sitting on the edge with her legs crossed. She picked up the new contract Marcus had brought, the one meant to sell her to the Russians, and slowly tore it in half. Lee stood up. He didn't sit behind the desk anymore. He walked around to stand behind her, placing his large, tattooed hands on her shoulders. He leaned down, his chin grazing her ear, looking out at the empty room that was now their kingdom. "The asset has appreciated," he murmured against her skin. Naomi leaned back against his chest, closing her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "The asset is gone, Lee. Now, you just have a partner." Agreed. The power balance had shifted, settled, and equalized. The girl who walked in trembling was dead. The woman who sat on the throne had just begun to rule.